like that.
So we were talking about, maybe we can shift before we bring people in. I just wanted to talk a little bit about mereological nihilism, or compositional nihilism, it's also known as.
Right.
I think you and I share a view here that we've kind of stumbled across, and do you want to maybe talk a little bit about this? This has to do with the nature of existence and things, right? In terms of reality, in terms of what constitutes something. What does it mean for something to exist or not exist, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Let me read off the wiki off here, and anybody can pull this up, and I'll spell it out for you too. It's mereological nihilism. It's MEREOLOGICAL, and then nihilism. It can also be just broken down to nihilism or compositional nihilism, like he was saying. It's the mereological position that objects with proper parts do not exist. Not only objects in space, but also objects existing in time do not have temporal parts. And only basic building blocks without parts exist. Or more succinctly, nothing is a proper part of anything. And to try to break that down, if I had, so say Legos are the base material of reality. Whatever they are actually, they are the foundation. And if I go to build a wall with these blocks, and eventually a castle, do I now have something different? I still have the base material. It may be formed in the shape of a castle. It may have the turrets and the door and all these things, but these are not separate from this base material. They are still there are no proper separate parts of this. Another one is like lemon and water to make lemonade. Lemonade's not a new substance, a proper substance, right? It's still the lemon and the water, and whatever those foundations though are end up being the same thing. So it's just a expression maybe of the same thing. In any of those instances, what seems to be separate parts are actually just expressions of the same foundation.
Yeah, these notions go to Heraclitus and Parmenides, right? And so those were pre-Socratic philosophers who had Heraclitus came before Parmenides, and his point of view was that that moments are discrete, that things change, come in that something legitimately comes in and out of existence, and that that things are becoming constantly, right? That's you'll hear him talk a lot about being and becoming, right? Mm-hmm. And so so Heraclitus had a perspective of something that it's presentism, or that each moment that there's true movement and change, and that there's discreteness, right, within reality, right? But Parmenides came after him and said, no, things are being, that there's the paradoxes that arose around him. I can't remember, was it Zeno or who was it a disciple of his, or not a disciple, but a student of his, who posited a number of paradoxes, and it's the one of that the famous one is Achilles and the tortoise, right? And so Achilles gives the tortoise 100-yard or 100-meter, well, we'll work in meters, 100 meters head start. By the time that Achilles has come to the tortoise, to the 100-meter mark, the tortoise will have moved X amount. By the time the Achilles then gets to the X amount, he'll have moved another X amount. And that, according to, if we think about it, he should never reach the tortoise, right? So he says there's something a little queer about that. Obviously, that's not our experience. And so my understanding is that he posits a eternalism, or a what's sometimes termed a block universe. If you think about it with Einstein, with the 4 dimensions, with time being equivalent dimension to the other 3 dimensions of space, that you have the entirety of history laid out in a block, essentially. You have every moment represented, and it's not a discrete moment. It is all part of one whole, right? So that's the oneness of it. And that there are no, things do not come in and out of existence, that you can't make something not, that it's just the a different representation or manifestation of the one, right? And so those are kind of the 2 points of view, and the way that I don't want to bring Trey's philosophy in, but I see him kind of bringing the 2 together, where he wants to say that one is Heraclitus, and that God is Parmenides, right? Like those are the 2, the being and the becoming, right? My problem is that those have to interact at some point, and then you have how do you do that, right? So and I think Plato actually tried to harmonize them, not harmonize them, but he expounded upon it. But I'm less familiar with how he wanted to do that in terms of the forms, right? The forms were the forms would be the eternal, or the being, and then you have the becoming as the specifics, right? The particulars that come from the forms, right? The way that I view it, and you and I share this, is that I see our categorizations, and I always bring up the ship of Theseus, right? That you can take the ship of Theseus is this ship, and you break it down and you take off pieces and you set them aside. At what point is it no longer the ship of Theseus, right? That's the big question. What makes it the ship of Theseus? What is it about it? And if you were to take those pieces off and build a ship that looked like the ship of Theseus from those pieces as you took them off, if you finished, would that be the ship of Theseus? Or at what point was one not one or the other? And there's like 5 or 6 different possibilities that you can you can continue to break this down. It also talks about time, right? Like there's the young woman and there's a young girl and an old woman who happen to be the same person, but at different points in time, they're not the same, right? It's the same person, but in time, they're different, right? So it really gets down to, and this is what I was trying to get across, is that we have these inferences and these categories that we built for things that we understand from things, and a lot of it deals with our sense perception and how we group and get and collect data and how it's organized in our mind.
But I think we do that with math too. That's how we deal with. I see math as collections of singles, and we do the same thing with categorize 2 as a single and a single. Categorize 4 as a single and a single and a single and a single. And it's just the way our minds work. It's our constructs to categorize.
Yeah, I think the laws of logic are mental constructs that we infer, that they're not rules that the universe must obey. They are our inferences that we've drawn regarding what we've seen always be the case, and we can't imagine being any other way, right? But it's still a product of our imagination, in that it could be the other way. We just might not be able to imagine it, right? So in terms of the constituent bits, I have a hard time saying that I've gone out of existence. What does that mean? Well, you're simply saying that the constituent bits that you used to categorize as me are no longer the case, right? That form is no longer that form, but the bits are still. It still ultimately goes down to bosons and quarks, right? Like quarks are the constituent bits, right? And when we're assuming that there are bits below that we're not privy to, or theorizing, we're trying to come up with a common substance, right?
Yeah, and that's what I say when I was saying foundation, whatever that is. It's unknown to me, whatever it is, just that it's something, or that the foundation of whatever it is. And this is leads me to believe more in the eternal universe, in at least in a form of an eternal universe, because I'm not asserting that's actually the case, but it leans more towards that, because I'm not convinced that the universe, one, was created or is a creation, or that it's changing.
Yeah.
right? Like that matter or whatever the foundation is actually disappears into nothing, or is created, or just pops out of nothing. Like, I don't have any examples actually of anything actually going away or coming back.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to infer off of something that you don't have any experience with, right? You can't make some claims. Like people say, well, nothing can do. Well, and hell if I know, right? I don't have a lot of experience from which to draw on that.
Yeah.
And
Like
in
you
the
said with categories, like the identity that's me. I die. My identity, I guess, in a loose way, has changed. It would have been a really loose way, but nothing of me has gone away or disappeared. I'm starting to break down into other things.
yeah,
But
there is a change in
never
time.
Right, yeah, the progression of time is through that, but there's still, even from the beginning of me decomposing to the end of me decomposing, there, I would still say there's no real proper change there. Nothing that was not there to nothing that was not there to begin with isn't there now, and things that weren't there to begin with aren't there now. So nothing new has come out of it, and nothing old has disappeared out of it.
Mm-hmm.
That makes any sense?
Yeah. I think it. That I hadn't mentioned it, but the B theory of time, this notion that that the whole structure, both forward and backward, are real in the sense that the what I will do tomorrow is set, right? That there is a continuum that flows through to that moment and to my eventual breakdown and those bits going elsewhere and whatnot. That's the block universe, right? I like that a lot because the way it's represented is like a loaf of bread, right? So you have space that's been reduced down to a 2-dimension slice, right? And then you have the time dimension. And then it makes it really easy to see how, from distant objects or whatnot, how we perceive different things at different times. That are, I go out and I look at the night sky, and it's the way the night sky looks like now. But when I'm saying now, that isn't the moment. That is not the now for all of those things, right? Those have all different nows from each other and from what I'm experiencing right in that moment, right?
Right.
So yeah, it gets really really trippy. But on a B theory like that, in terms of contingents, this is a great who was it? It was Dave S. had a hangout with Trey where he was trying to talk to him about B theory and in terms of contingents. And it's interesting, if you take a necessary God who is as he is, and you have the properties and the will and everything else in this being, and this being creates a universe or creates something, there's a contingence both ways. You can't have the one without the other. The God would be necessary for the universe, but the universe would be necessary for that God, because that God would not do anything otherwise. That God would be necessarily as it was, such that it created the thing that it created, right? So
and that was kind of scary. I know exactly what you're talking about, because I kind of got scary, not on the scary that God might exist, it's scary on adding more complication to my thoughts. Because if this came down to God and the universe have to exist necessarily, God cannot exist without the universe, and the universe cannot exist without God, so they're necessary to each other, contingent upon each other, then the eternal universe model could be correct still with God.
Right. Yeah.
So that added a complication into my view on it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more. Obviously, there's a lot of configurations that you could have well beyond our knowledge. You could have. I don't see why you couldn't have two beings unbeknownst to each other who eternally existed, who just never came in contact. Or there's a lot of things. I'm sure somebody out there is ripping their hair out if they had hair to rip out, as they say.
Yes, because I know his answer. Because they would be the same being.
No, yeah, they'd be contingent. They'd be contingent.
It'd be happening.
I'm not going to let Trey in this room, by the way. That distracted me right there too, Trey. The contingent existence is not necessary. Yeah. Anyway, it's interesting to think about, and there's certainly been a lot of people who have chimed in on it. And I really appreciate that you share that perspective of the categories or the things that we see as discrete units are not themselves discrete at all, right?
Right. Right.
So that's really interesting. I wanted to ask if so we had gotten into the topic of composition of the universe and whatnot. Did Ozzy or Deirdre have any thoughts about that? I know Ozzy, you're a neutral monist.
Yeah, I'm a neutral monist, but I mean that really doesn't touch on on mereology, which is what you were discussing. And for those who don't know what mereology is, because I don't know if it was defined exactly, but I mean, in philosophy there's this branch of philosophy that we call ontology, which is this theory of what is, the stuff, right? Is there mental stuff and physical stuff, or if you're a physicalist, no, what you're saying is, no, I'm a monist, I'm not a dualist. There's only physical stuff. If you're an idealist, you're saying there's only mental stuff, and if you're a dualist, you can believe in both kinds, right? So that would be an ontological theory, okay? But within ontology, within that branch of ontology, there's a sub-branch of questions called mereological questions, right? And mereology is the sub-branch of ontology that's devoted to discussions of parts and wholes and how parts relate to their wholes. Okay, and so that's what mereology is. Okay, so I'll give you an example of a mereological theory. Here's a mereological commitment that most people have, and they don't even realize that they have this mereological theory operating in them. Right? If you think that everything in the world is made out of itsy bitsy physical particles, okay, or if you think that at least all physical things are made out of itsy bitsy physical particles, okay, that's a mereological theory. That's the idea that everything around you is actually divisible. Like the table isn't a table. The table is actually just an aggregate, a concatenation of this blooming, buzzing confusion of physical particles, right, in fields of force. Okay, that's a mereological theory that you're operating on, right? In other words, what's really going on over there is not a table. The table is just a kind of surface level illusion. What's actually going on behind the scenes, right, invisible to you, is this blooming, buzzing confusion of particles bashing into each other, right? That's a mereological theory, okay? That there aren't real, like some people would actually say, well, no, there aren't really tables. What there are particles bashing into each other, right? Whereas other people would say, no, there's both. There's both a table and there are particles. The table is made out of the particles, but there really is a table there. Whereas other people would say, no, actually, a table is just a label for that particular and temporary organization of those particles, but there isn't really a table there. Whereas other people would say, no, there's some sense in which there really is a table there. It's not apart from the, so this kind of controversy about, how real is the table, or is, with respect to the particles, that's a mereological dispute. That's a philosophical dispute, a mereological dispute within the field of ontology. So, for those people who weren't familiar with it, that's what that is.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't touch on what mereology was.
Yeah, and a mereological, well, you've already explained what a mereological nihilist is, so I won't do on that.
Yeah, and I think Bert and I are even if it's not that label, we're there on the of it being a category or a mental construct of a category for the table.
I think when I was talking about it, I was referring to it in the context of initially of ontologies, that everything reduces down to a fundamental category, right? And that is that the way that you view ontologies or categories of things, Ozzy, in terms of being a mental a way to organize your percepts, or how do you view it?
To have an ontology is to have a theory of what there is, of what kinds of things exist in reality. Okay. So if you're a physicalist, the kinds of things there are particles in fields of force, right? And space-time is a thing. It's an actual thing, right? But your ontology can contain other things. You can say, well, for instance, no, there aren't just these things. There are abstracta. There are abstract things. There aren't just physical facts. There are also abstract facts, right? Like for something to be to the left of something, That's a relational fact. That's a kind of fact, right? So one way to think about ontology is the kinds of things that exist, the kinds of facts there are, right? Some people would say that there's no such thing as a sociological fact. Sociological facts are actually just facts that at a higher level of description of actually individual psychological facts. And individual psychological facts aren't actually facts in themselves. Psychological facts, like the fact that I'm in pain or I have a headache or I'm thinking thoughts right now, those are just neurological facts. The neurological facts are actually just biochemical or organic chemistry facts. And those facts are actually physical facts and so forth. So an ontology is really just your theory of how you chop up reality and what you think reality is ultimately made out of and made up of. What are the basic fundamental categories of reality? That's one way of thinking about the subject of ontology and what ontology is. Right? And everyone has an ontology, right? You might not have thought about it, you may not be conscious, but you are in fact operating in the world as if you're in the grips of a theory, right? And you're more in the grips of the theory the less you've thought about it, right? The less you are aware of your assumptions, the more you are their creature, the more you are beholden to what you believe without ever knowing that you're believing these things, because you're on autopilot. Right? It's only when you sort of reflect on these things and preferably do a little reading up on these and find out some of the competing theories that you realize, wow, all along, how about that? My whole life I've been a substance dualist, or my whole life I've been a materialist and a physicalist, and I never realized it. Right? It's only when you become conscious that you are operating under these assumptions that you're able to call them into question and critically examine them and offer up some defense of them, or revise them if you discover that they're wanting.
Once you take the red pill.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's the advantage of philosophy is it allows you to mine the best that's been thought and said on some of these questions and realize some of the things that we're committed to that we never realized we were committing to, and so we are sleepwalking through life unless we think about these things. I mean, that's why, I mean, famously, from Socrates, this famous line that the unexamined life is not worth living. Well, that's perhaps overstating it, but certainly I think the examined life is an enriched life and a more rewarding life, and I think we are less dogmatic the more we think about these things. And the people who think that this is all just effete intellectual nonsense, I think those people are running the risk of settling into a dogmatism without recognizing that there's an area of dogmatism that they could be falling into.
Well, I'm gonna go get my wife. Do you mind telling her that?
Oh, you are in a there we go. Did you just call your wife a dogmatist? Because now you're in the dog house for that.